won't just depend on our own ability anyway to order our own affairs, but also on stability and economic recovery from the rest of the world, and in particular on a settled peace in the Middle East, whose last war caused the five-fold increase in oil prices that started this whole crisis off. In recent weeks, there have been some hopeful signs from there. Here's Richard Kershaw.
When the fighting stopped after the October War at the end of 1973, nothing was settled. Lines were drawn on the map for a temporary standoff and a ceasefire, but it had to be temporary. This is what the map looked like. Egypt was left with part of its troops across the Suez Canal with a buffer zone between them and the Israelis. But Israel still held on to most of Sinai. Israel also stayed in Jordan's West Bank and on part of Syria's Golan Heights. The question since then has been how to move from this temporary standoff to a permanent new peace. Should it be achieved as a whole, as a total package in one go, or might it be better to take a step-by-step, area-by-area approach? The first attempt was to look at things as a whole, at the Geneva conference sponsored by the United States and Russia, which endorsed the ceasefire. But this quickly got nowhere, and the Geneva conference has been in recess ever since. What the different sides were asking for was still miles apart. The Palestinians were demanding a state of their own and still effectively calling for the end of Israel. The Israelis were demanding real security, which meant keeping at least some parts of their military conquests. And the Arab states, where they had an agreed line at all, were demanding at the very least the carrying out of the Security Council resolutions, the famous resolutions 242 and 338, which, by their interpretation, meant Israel getting out of every bit of land it had occupied since 1967. The failure of Geneva started Dr. Henry Kissinger off on his long quest to see if he could get agreement step by step. In particular, if he could get further Israeli withdrawals in Sinai, which would lead to some sort of real peace with the major Arab combatant, Sadat's Egypt. 3 months ago, Dr. Kissinger's efforts also broke down, and there seemed no alternative to an eventual return to fighting. But now, President Ford himself has come into the act. Last week, he met President Sadat in Austria. This week, he meets Israeli Premier Yitzhak Rabin in Washington, after which the long-awaited review of American Middle East policy will be completed. Could there be, at last, some sort of break in the logjam, perhaps another step between Israel and Egypt? There have been some encouraging signs. One last week, one of the greatest symbolic meaning. Last week, after 8 years of complete closure and waste of one of the world's great trade highways, the Suez Canal was reopened to traffic. For those 8 years, Egypt had lost hundreds of millions of pounds from the ships that would have used it. Now they're lining up again to pass through this waterway that has been at the center of so much fighting and intransigent passion. For President Sadat, resplendent in Admiral's uniform, the day was presented as a triumph. His soldiers had crossed the canal in battle. Now it had been cleared with British and other help. The consequences of war could start to disappear. As the first convoy started up the canal last Thursday, it was clear that this was more than an economic gain for Egypt. It was also a gesture which proclaimed that Egypt really wanted peace. And the Israelis responded in kind. The day before the opening, they started to pull back part of their forces in Sinai. But not only the canal is involved, the ruined cities on its banks are now to be reconstructed and will become tax-free zones for international industry. More than a hint, virtually a promise, Egypt won't go to war again across the canal. A few days ago, I visited President Sadat at his rest house on the Nile. There, in informal mood, he told me what he intended the reopening of Suez to mean.
In reopening the canal, I wanted to send certain messages. The first message, I'm telling you that I don't fear peace, and I can work out peace. While Israel, during the mission of Dr. Kissinger, proved to fear peace, and even if it doesn't fear peace, it has been proved that it is not capable to work out peace. And we must work for peace, and it is a very hard work, a very hard job to work. And especially after the failure of the mission of Dr. Kissinger lately in last March. But still I am optimistic because even if Dr. Kissinger's mission failed, is it the end of the world? No.
There is an immediate question of relevance to Israel. When you open the canal, will you allow Israeli cargoes, I say cargoes, not ships, to go through the canal?
As I said before, it will depend upon the conduct of Israel.
But you did agree at the time of the ceasefire that Israeli cargoes should, if the ceasefire continued and stuck, that they should be able to send cargo through the canal.
According to the conduct of Israel, yes.
Any negotiations do involve making concessions, and you're negotiating now. What are you asking the Israelis to give up?
The 338 resolution of the ceasefire after the October War says this. Says that the two superpowers guarantee the ceasefire, guarantee the immediate implementation of the resolution 242. All I am asking is the immediate implementation of resolution 242. Only.
Could I ask you what you are prepared, since it is a negotiation, to give in return? In particular, you have said this before, you do accept that you could give an undertaking of Israel's right to exist.
It has already been given in accepting the resolution 242.
And full recognition, too?
Not full recognition.
But eventual full recognition?
It is a recognition because in resolution 242 there are certain obligations on Israel and certain obligations on us. If everyone fulfills his obligation, we shall reach, I said, I'm ready for a peace agreement, officially, first. Second, all I can see now, and what should be our aim and should be our achievement, if we can do it, is that to reach the state of non-belligerency. If we can achieve this, I think our generation would have done his job 100%, and we shall leave the rest to the next generation.
There's a central question which is about territory, about land. In any partial settlement or step-by-step approach, you wouldn't get all your land back at once. Must there be a commitment to hand it all back eventually for you to make any agreement at all?
I think now we have reached the limits, especially after the efforts that has been done by Dr. Kissinger. And mark this, America provides Israel with food, butter, guns, aeroplanes, the deficit even in their budget, everything. And in spite of that, Israel defies America and undermines its policy step by step in the area.
You still seem to be depending on the United States to break the logjam for you, and yet the United States is committed to Israel. What do you think of United States policy now?
Well, it is time that the United States, as I told you, states its policy quite clear for a final solution. Why am I depending? I'm not depending on the United States. I am only being practical. All the cards in this game is in the hands of the United States. Because, as I told you, they provide Israel with everything. And they are the only who can exert pressure on Israel.
Yet to some extent, it looks now as if America doesn't have a policy at all. They're doing their review, and it is fairly unclear what American policy is.
This is a pity. And much more than this, there are two governments now in America, one in the White House and the other is on the Capitol Hill.
But you don't expect the United States to abandon Israel?
On the contrary, quote me, I am not asking America to abandon Israel. I'm not asking America to drop Israel. I'm not asking America to drop even the special relations with Israel. But I'm asking America, is America going to protect and defend Israel in its own borders or in its conquests also.
There is one important change in the United States position. Vietnam has fallen. Don't you think, and wouldn't you feel if you were an Israeli, that they have reason to doubt U.S. guarantees after what happened in Vietnam?
Then why shouldn't be U.S., Soviet, British, French, or the Security Council guarantee? Why shouldn't be like that?
What role do you see for Britain and other European nations in this whole search for peace?
To evade any polarization between the two superpowers in the Geneva Conference, I'm asking to add some big powers from Western Europe, and I quoted mainly Britain and France for this, maybe some other non-aligned countries also, to evade, the polarization between the two superpowers, so that we will not reach at any moment a state of stagnation in the Geneva Conference.
Do you merely mean you'd like to see Britain and France and other countries at the conference, or would you like us to be involved in this actual negotiating search for peace now?
Both, if possible.
You have been, and in some ways are still, dependent almost totally on Russia for supplies of arms. And yet, shortly before the last Middle East war, you kicked out all the Russian advisors. Have you ever regretted doing that?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. I don't regret it at all. And it has proved to be right. We have done our battle, pure Egyptian plan, from planning up to fighting, everything.
What is your relationship with Russia now?
We are on friendly basis, but as it happens between friends, we have some points of difference, mainly. On the economic side, I'm asking for a grace period because of the tight economic position that I am in.
That's on repaying the money for the arms?
That's right. Second...
Have they shown any sign of willingness to give you that?
Not yet. Not yet. But we are having negotiations between us. The other point is on the military side, and I have asked for replacement for the arms I lost in 73 war. And I'm not asking it free. I'm asking to pay for it. But up to this moment, we didn't agree upon it. But they have started since last January to send me the rest of the contracts that has been due in 73 and 74.
But since the October War, Russia has replaced some of your brother Arab nations' weapons with updated ones and given them more modern weapons than you've had. Isn't this a form of pressure on you, or at least discrimination in favor of, shall we say, Syria and perhaps Libya?
Well, this is a very peculiar situation that they have put me in. They are not only the Russians, but the Americans also. Before the ceasefire, I mean before the 22nd of October, the ceasefire, Syria was replaced completely with every armament lost. Israel was replaced completely with every armament lost. This from the Soviet Union, the other from America.
But doesn't this make it feel that there's some form of discrimination by Russia against you?
It is. Exactly it is. And for 14 months after that, after the ceasefire, Russia continued to send arms to Syria, and America continued to send arms to Israel. I received nothing except starting from last January, as I told you.
There is talk of a major new Russian deal with Libya for arms,
yes.
Perhaps again more modern than some of the ones you have, and talk even of Russian bases in Libya. What do you feel about that? Do you believe it to be true?
Well, it is a fact that a very big deal of 4 billion Libyan pounds, and this means $12 billion, has been concluded between Libya and the Soviet Union. The most amazing thing is that the arms in this deal are much more sophisticated, and we knew nothing about it, me or Syria, except when I heard about this deal. So it will need years and years for Soviet experts to train the Libyans. And if we know the state of the Libyans, this will mean from 20 to 50 years.
Well, what do you see behind this deal? Do you see that Russia is trying to get a new base somewhere on the Mediterranean and the Middle East, you having sent the Russian advisors out of this country?
You can draw your conclusions and don't make trouble for me with the Russians. I have already ample troubles, yes.
You have done, sir, a deal with France to buy Mirage jets, and now with Britain on helicopters, and there are thoughts of other things. Do you see the beginning of a major replacement of your sources of arms from Europe, from perhaps Britain and France?
Difficult, no. No, the amount of arms, the amount of Russian arms that I have needs very long years to come. And I'm not aiming for this. I have already taken a decision in '74 when I found myself, as I told you, in that peculiar position. Israel is receiving replacement and Syria is receiving replacement. I'm receiving nothing. I took a decision to diversify the sources of arms and started applying it with France and Britain.
Could I put it to you that the change over from one single source of arms to another is weakening, at least for a period, because you have to integrate your sources? I mean, in that sense, you could be weaker than you were.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. This will be true if you are changing the whole system. But if you are adding, for instance, from Britain, I'm adding new technology to the arms that I have already. So, on the contrary, it is improving my force.
There is the perennial problem in the Arab world of divisions of opinion between different states and with the Palestinians. Do you accept that these divisions are very deep?
No, I don't accept it at all. In one family, there will be always divisions.
If you do get a next step deal with Israel, do you believe you can get your brother Arab countries to accept it?
We are agreed upon one strategy. This strategy has 2 points. The first point is not to surrender 1 inch of our land. The second is not to compromise upon the Palestinian rights. Well, in between the tactical movements, we differ in this, but we don't differ in the strategic.
Who should represent the Palestinians at Geneva?
The PLO.
They would go as a delegation, or would they go as part of somebody else's delegation?
Yes, we have agreed that they will go as a delegation, separate delegation, with the full identity also. But it is for them to decide after that if they want to join any other delegation.
Do you accept, Mr. President, that the Palestinians are divided on their own view, and that at least part of the Palestinians would try and frustrate any agreement you or others might make?
Sure, I quite agree. It's not the Palestinians only. There are others in the Arab world who are just like that, yes. Yes, sure. I quite agree to this.
Do you fear they might be able to frustrate an agreement because the Palestinians are the heart of the problem?
No, very well. I must tell you this. The majority of the Arab leaders, the Arab world now, especially after the 6th of October, we are agreed upon, as I told you, certain strategy, and even those moderate elements in the PLO. So I don't see any difficulty. If we are not going to surrender any inch of our land and shall not compromise on this Palestinian problem, I don't see any difficulty at all, whatever this power raises, in concluding peace.
President Sadat, what is your vision for the future of Egypt, assuming that you do get a peace?
The rebuilding. You can't imagine how the infrastructure of the country has been damaged in the last 10 years, not only the 7 years before the October War.
It's rarely run down, is it?
In the last 10 years. Horrible. Really, I can't tell you. So the reconstruction and building the country on the new technology, and as I said before always, my main aim is a social insurance for every Egyptian.
Can I put a final question to you? One of the dilemmas which Egypt has faced is what was called a no-war, no-peace situation.
Quite right.
It's a dilemma rather than a policy.
Quite right.
If there isn't a peace now, do you see another war as inevitable?
Not at all. Not at all. On the contrary, I'm saying this. I'm saying that the main lesson that should be learned from the October War is that this Arab-Israeli conflict will never be solved by war or by power. It has been proved last October.
So you are a man totally for peace?
Quite right.
President Sadat of Egypt on his hopes for peace in the Middle East. And with that interview, we end Panorama for tonight. Good night.